Hello, thanks for joining me for another church visit. This is St Llawddog's Church in Cilgerran in North Pembrokeshire. There was a stone church here in the 13th century. The tower was added in the 15th century. The medieval church was visited in 1811 by Richard Fenton, described in his historical tour through Pembrokeshire as a very interesting study for the pencil, but there is nothing in the structure, within or without, worthy of a particular observation, if you accept a beautiful fragment of the rood loft yet remaining, of the same character and most probably of the same age, with that most perfect and elegant specimen of the kind in the little church of Patryshaw in Brecknockshire. A century earlier, in 1715, the royal arms and boards with the Ten Commandments, Lord's Prayer and Creed had been put up on the rood loft, suggesting it was either quite a substantial fragment or had fallen into decay during the 18th century. At the very end of the Georgian period, the church was described as an ancient structure in the early style of English architecture and in tolerably good repair. Unfortunately, its days were numbered. In the last days of the Georgian period, Daniel Evans, an architect of Cardigan, rebuilt it, bizarrely making it smaller, and destroyed the medieval roof, rood screen, and chancel windows. Evans was an architect and innkeeper of the Castle Inn in Cardigan. I don't know if he was a good innkeeper, but he certainly wasn't a good church architect. His jerry-built replacement of the medieval church had to be demolished 15 years later after its construction on grounds of safety. Lessons apparently having been learned, and Evans having died at the inn in 1852, a better architect was sought to replace the failed structure, and so it was that Benjamin Ferrey, who studied under A.W.N. Pugin's father and was a friend and biographer of Pugin, came to design the present church. He was thankfully a competent architect. Eastlake, in his history of the Gothic revival, said his work possessed the rare charm of simplicity without lacking interest, and called him one of the earliest, ablest and most zealous pioneers of the modern Gothic school. Ferry's plan provided a good-sized church, correctly arranged by the standards of the Ecclesiological Society, of which he was an active member. It retained the tower, added a nave, chancel, south aisle, and was built in the 1850s. Ferry had another bite of the cherry in the 1860s when he added a vestry and organ chamber, and his son Edmund designed the reredos, which was added in the 1870s. Ferry's church features some very good tracery in the decorated style. This window is a copy of one at Castle Ashby Church in Northamptonshire. Unusually, Ferry used the slate quarried just down the road at Cilgerran for some of the windows, combining it with the more conventional bathstone, which was easier to carve. The windows were filled with glass which is not of the 14th century style favoured by many church architects of the day, but is mostly in a style which is based on paintings rather than medieval stained glass designs. The windows are by Wales, O'Connor, J.G. Howe and Ballantyne. The colours are certainly rich, but I have to admit I prefer the sort of windows in the entirely medieval style. Ferry's window tracery, as I mentioned before, was copied from a medieval example, and so was the font, modelled on the 14th century one at St Mary Magdalene in Oxford. The stone pulpit is Ferry's own design, though, and carved by J. Evan Thomas of Brecon and London, a talented sculptor who studied under Sir Francis Chantrey, no less, and was responsible for the figure of Prince Albert on the Albert Memorial in Tenby. The border tiles on the step risers are a nice touch and match some on the edge of the sanctuary tiling, but that was put in 1877 by Ferry's son. So are these steps later than the pulpit? Well, possibly. The original plan shows the pulpit steps coming up from the nave and not from the chancel steps, so perhaps it was remodelled. Ferrey used Cilgerran slate rather than Bath stone for the chancel arch and for the arcades, doorways and so on, but not for the east window. That has no Cilgerran slate at all. The sanctuary has to have the best stone. Edmund Ferrey's reredos is typical of the 1870s. It includes some marble. The organ chamber is an 1860s addition and has a high round window as the organ takes up the rest of the wall. The Victorian church received a generous grant of £100 from the ISBC. 171 seats were free, but some were not. They were reserved for the gentry and have closing doors. There is no porch on this church. It's entered, as it always was, through the west, under the medieval tower, and a north vestry was added at the same time as the organ chamber. Money came in dribs and drabs here, as was often the case in Welsh churches. The gentry will have contributed, and their early memorials were saved from the earlier churches and recited here. This one is from the 17th century and is to John Lloyd of Cilgerran. It has an epitaph written by the poet, the matchless Orinda, Catherine Phillips, of the Priory in Cardigan, and author of the first English play written by a woman to be performed on the professional stage. This one is to Griffith, a Royal Naval surgeon who was lost in the wreck of HMS Confiance off Ireland in 1822, along with the rest of the 120-strong crew. It lists the ships he served on, including the Queen Charlotte, which took part in the freeing of European slaves from the Barbary pirates at Algiers during his time as a member of the crew, and he was also surgeon on the sloop Shearwater, part of the squadron appointed to guard Napoleon when he was imprisoned at St Helena. Quite a career, and he was only 30 when he was lost at sea. More modern memorials are these Celtic studios windows, which show Cilgerran Castle and coracle men and farmers. Outside we found an Ogham stone and the tomb of Sir William Logan, a Canadian-born geologist whose interest in his chosen field was sparked while managing a copper works owned by his family in Swansea. He became founding director of the Geological Survey of Canada, an organisation surveying the Canadian mineral resources. He died at his sister's home, Castell Malgwyn, on the Cilgerran side of the River Teifi near Llecryd Bridge. And the other tombs here are those of the Gowers of that house, described rather cuttingly in the Pembrokeshire buildings of Wales as 6 ridgeback slabs tethered to a central plinth, like beached whales. Another person of note buried here has a later monument, his first one, presuming he had one, being lost. Dr. Thomas Fire wrote the Book of Children, the first work in English on paediatrics, published in 1545. It recognised that children should be treated as distinct from adults. Having said that, his cure for shingles involves stamping earthworms in vinegar and applying them to the affected skin. Thankfully, modern medicine has moved on a bit since the 16th century. I hope you found this visit to Cilgerran Church interesting. It's not always open, but the key can be had from the rectory on Cymai Street. Please remember to click the like button if you enjoyed this visit. And, as always, thank you for watching.